I knew something was off the moment I saw the basement light on from the backyard window. I live alone. I never leave that light on. And that door, always locked. I'm Gordon Ellers, a 39-year-old HVAC technician who finally bought his own place after years of apartment hopping. Quiet neighborhood, decent folks aside from the HOA, of course. They're not just nosy, they're obsessed with controlling every inch of your life. And leading the charge? Zelda Whitmore, the queen of complaints and unsolicited power trips. Zelda was exactly what you'd expect from a woman who took her HOA title way too seriously. 50-something, iron-stiff bob haircut, and a voice that could pierce drywall. She once fined me for having a garden hose improperly coiled. I wish I was joking. Anyway, back to the light in my basement. I walked around the side of the house, careful not to make a sound. The basement windows are small, but with the light on, I could clearly see someone moving inside. I crouched low, and then I saw her. Zelda in my basement. I blinked, thinking maybe I was wrong. But no, she was rifling through a box I hadn't touched in months. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. 911, what's your emergency? There's a woman in my basement. She broke in. I didn't give her permission to be there. Do you know her? Oh yeah, Zelda Whitmore. She's the head of the HOA. A pause. She's in your home right now. Yes, in the basement. I'm outside. I have her on video. Officers arrived in under 10 minutes. I met them at the curb and showed them the video I'd recorded Zelda flipping through my stuff like she owned the place. They nodded and headed toward the house. One of them stayed back to ask me questions. She lives a couple houses down, I explained. No key, no permission. That door is always locked. How'd she get in? Good question. The back window looks cracked. I think she forced it. It didn't take long. They found her still in the basement, holding an old manila folder and looking completely unfazed. I'm not stealing anything, she snapped at the officers. I'm investigating. There's been a lot of non-compliant behavior from this homeowner. I'm well within my rights as HOA president. One of the officers turned to her. Ma'am, this is private property. You broke in. That's burglary. Zelda turned red. No, you don't understand. He's been violating HOA storage codes. I needed to verify. You needed a warrant, the officer replied flatly, not a clipboard. They cuffed her right there in my driveway in full view of half the neighborhood. I couldn't have planned it better if I tried. As she was being led to the squad car, she twisted her neck toward me like an angry owl. This isn't over, Mr. Ellers, I raised an eyebrow. Oh, it really is. I didn't know it yet, but that was just the beginning. The HOA wasn't going to take her arrest quietly. And I wasn't about to let them sweep it under the rug. 2 days after Zelda's arrest, the HOA board called for an emergency meeting at the community clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course, but word gets around when half your street saw their queen bee marched into a police car in handcuffs. By the time I got home from a furnace inspection job that Thursday evening, there was a folded paper envelope taped to my door. No postage, no return address, just my name scrawled in blocky pen strokes. Inside was a formal notice, typed and stamped with the HOA's letterhead. The language was stiff, full of legal-sounding fluff. But the gist was clear. They were initiating a compliance investigation into my property and behavior. I laughed out loud. They were retaliating. The next morning, I drove to the city records office and pulled the HOA's incorporation documents and bylaws. It was all public, just no one had ever bothered to dig. I spent the rest of the afternoon at my kitchen table, a highlighter in one hand and a legal pad in the other. The deeper I read, the more obvious it became. Zelda had been operating miles beyond her authority for years. She wasn't just overreaching. She'd been fabricating roles, inventing enforcement clauses, and signing off on penalties that weren't even backed by the bylaws. But unless someone challenged it formally, the board just accepted it. I needed to talk to someone who'd been around longer. That's how I ended up on Harold Brenner's front porch with a 6-pack of root beer and a copy of the HOA charter. Harold was in his 70s, a retired land surveyor and one of the original owners when the neighborhood was built. He opened the door with a cautious look and blinked at the root beer. "I don't usually take bribes," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Then call it a peace offering," I said. "I have questions about Zelda." Harold lowered himself into his recliner, gesturing for me to sit. "If it's about her breaking in, I already heard. My cousin's the dispatcher who took the call." I figured. What I need to know is how she got so much control. "None of this stuff she's pulling is in the bylaws." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's because she rewrote half of it, or at least she tried to. Years ago, she proposed amendments, lots of them. Most people didn't read the fine print. But when turnout was low for the vote, she claimed it passed with a quorum." "Did it?" Harold shook his head. "Not even close. She counted 3 empty proxies and twisted the math. I raised hell about it at the time, but no one backed me. Folks were too scared of losing their pool passes or getting fined." I flipped through the notes I'd made. "She's been enforcing fake amendments for over a decade, longer than that. She got on the board after her husband passed, turned grief into a crusade. This place became her little kingdom." I went home that night with a different plan. It wasn't enough to prove she'd broken into my basement. I needed to show she'd been abusing her position for years, fabricating authority, threatening residents, and altering documents to hold power. So I started with the board itself. There were 4 other members listed on the HOA website. I called them one by one. 2 didn't answer. 1 hung up. But the 4th, a woman named Deanna Wu, agreed to meet at the local diner. She showed up in a gray hoodie and jeans, hair pulled up like she'd come straight from yoga. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes scanning the room. "I don't want people seeing me with you," she said. "They'll think I'm turning." "Are you?" Deanna glanced down at the table, then exhaled. "I didn't vote for this. The investigation, the fines, any of it. Zelda pushed it through before I even saw the paperwork. Then help me stop her." She looked at me, brow furrowed. "Do you know what she's really doing with the HOA funds?" I froze. "What?" "She's been contracting her nephew's landscaping company for 3 times the going rate, billing for services that never happen. Last month, we paid for a full mulch replacement across the entire community. Not a single truck showed up. Do you have proof?" I was the treasurer before she demoted me. I kept copies off the books. I didn't know what to do with them until now. Deanna slid a flash drive across the table. That night, I didn't sleep. I reviewed every file, bank statements, invoices, internal memos. Zelda had embezzled tens of thousands in community money through shell contracts and backdated approvals. I cross-referenced her nephew's company filings with the state business registry. The company didn't even have a license. This wasn't just corruption. It was criminal fraud. The next morning, I walked into the police station with a binder full of printed documents and a digital copy. I asked for Detective Ramirez, a contact I'd worked with once during a furnace inspection gone sideways. He remembered me. "I've got something bigger than a break-in," I told him, dropping the binder on his desk. He flipped through the first few pages, eyes narrowing. "Is this what I think it is? She's been defrauding the HOA for years. I've got witness testimony, financial records, and forged amendments to the bylaws." Ramirez looked up. "You're telling me she fabricated votes and funneled HOA money to her own family with fake contracts and ghost services. And she retaliated against me with a fake investigation the day after she was arrested." He leaned back in his chair. "Give me the weekend. Don't talk to anyone about this. Not yet." By Monday morning, everything exploded. Police cruisers rolled into the neighborhood just after dawn. Zelda was arrested again, this time from inside her garage where she was trying to shred boxes of paper. The officers hauled out bags of destroyed documents, half-melted credit card receipts, and a laptop she tried to douse with bleach. The news vans followed by noon. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, watching as she was loaded into the back of another patrol car, this time with a detective riding shotgun. Deanna stood beside me, arms folded. "You sure you want to live here after this?" she asked. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "This place needs to remember it belongs to the people who live here, Not one woman with a gavel and a grudge, she nodded. Then let's clean house. Starting with a full audit and a new election. And bylaws that can't be rewritten on a whim. I spent the next week helping the city's financial crimes unit catalog every document. Turns out, Zelda's nephew had already fled the state, but the paper trail she left was ironclad. They froze her accounts and opened a formal investigation into conspiracy and wire fraud. The HOA board dissolved under city order. A temporary oversight panel was installed, led by Harold, Deanna, and a former city clerk who lived on the next block, and me. I installed motion sensors, reinforced the basement window, and finally had a Saturday where I could sit on my back porch with a cold drink and no clipboard-wielding tyrants lurking around the corner. For the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood actually felt like home. On Tuesday morning, I got a call from Detective Ramirez. His voice was clipped and serious, without the dry humor he usually had tucked somewhere in his tone. "We need you to come down to City Hall," he said. "There's a council hearing scheduled for this afternoon. You're listed as a primary witness." I pulled into the municipal parking garage just after lunch. The council chamber wasn't some grand rotunda, just a rectangular room with wood-paneled walls and a long bench of city officials seated behind microphones. The chairs were mostly filled with reporters, city employees, and a smattering of residents, some familiar from the neighborhood, others just curious onlookers. My name was called second. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and faced 6 council members who were reviewing the compiled evidence against Zelda and the former HOA board. Ramirez stood off to the side behind them, flanked by a woman in a navy suit who I later learned was the assistant district attorney. Councilwoman Lee, the chair of the committee, leaned forward. Her glasses were half slid down her nose. "Mr. Ellers, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the documentation you provided. What we need from you today is a direct account of how you came into possession of those records and what you personally witnessed." I kept it factual. I didn't embellish or dramatize. I laid out the timeline: the break-in, the retaliatory investigation, the meeting with Deanna, and the discovery of the fraudulent contracts. I described Harold's recollections and the evidence he'd helped me verify. When I was done, the room was quiet for a beat before Councilman Torres finally spoke. "Did you ever receive threats or coercion from any other board members beyond Miss Whitmore?" "No," I said, "but most of them signed off on things they never read." "I don't think they were complicit, just lazy." Councilwoman Lee tapped her pen against the desk, then turned to the ADA. "Miss Anton, based on what we've heard today and the documentation submitted last week, are you prepared to announce formal charges?" The ADA nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes. The state is charging Zelda Whitmore with second-degree burglary, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. Her arraignment is scheduled for Thursday morning." Most of the audience let out a collective breath. One man near the back actually clapped before someone elbowed him. By the time I stepped down, my palms were damp. I didn't sit back down. I left the chamber and walked out into the sunlight, needing air. Outside, Deanna was waiting beside a bench, scrolling through her phone. When she looked up, her face was paler than usual. "I just got a call from the interim board," she said. "You're not going to like this." "What now?" They found a second set of books. A bird chirped somewhere overhead. The contrast was jarring. "There were 2 ledgers," I asked. "Hidden in the attic of the clubhouse. Locked in a toolbox behind the insulation. One of the maintenance guys found it during a roof inspection. It's handwritten and it's ugly." "How ugly?" "They think she was skimming from the insurance pool too. Charging for non-existent storm repairs." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "So the funds meant for emergency damage coverage? Gone. Spent, probably laundered." By the following week, forensic accountants from the state's Department of Regulatory Oversight arrived. They set up shop in the clubhouse conference room, now emptied of Zelda's curated decor. The walls were bare, the shelves stripped of the fake awards and framed certifications she'd once used to decorate her power. I was called in again, this time to walk them through the timeline from my end. They'd already seized the digital archives from the HOA server, which had been stored on an old external hard drive hidden behind the community center's router. One of the accountants, a no-nonsense guy named Riley, looked up from a spreadsheet as I finished outlining the flow of money through the landscaping contracts. "You said she used her nephew's company. Did you ever meet him?" "No, never saw anyone from that company on site." "Not once." He exchanged a glance with his colleague. "That's consistent with what we're seeing. No tax records, no payroll, no travel logs. Then what was the money for?" Cashing checks through a second entity. "She was routing them through a dormant nonprofit that was never dissolved." And the kicker? That nonprofit was originally founded to fund community outreach programs. So she took the name of a charity to hide HOA embezzlement. Exactly. By Thursday, the charges against Zelda had quadrupled. The city froze 3 of her accounts and issued a lien on her property. Her house, a yellow colonial with perfectly trimmed hedges, was now surrounded by caution tape. A city notice hung crooked on her front door, flapping in the wind. But the story didn't stop there. Late Friday afternoon, Ramirez called again. "We traced a payment from one of the fraudulent invoices to a political campaign fund." I blinked. "What kind of campaign?" "City council. 2 years ago. The candidate withdrew before the election, but the PAC stayed active." "You're saying Zelda was funneling money into local politics?" "Looks that way. Not a lot, but enough to raise eyebrows." "We're opening a separate investigation into campaign finance violations." That weekend, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, more watchful. People took their garbage out slower, lingered longer at mailboxes. Conversations happened in driveways now open, honest ones. For the first time, neighbors were comparing notes publicly, sharing stories, rebuilding trust one chat at a time. On Sunday, Harold invited me and Deanna to a cookout in his backyard. His grill was ancient, but the burgers were perfect. We ate under a string of mismatched lanterns while his grandkids chased each other through the grass. Deanna brought a folder filled with proposals for the new HOA charter. She passed it around with a pen. No more unchecked fines, no backroom votes. Every board action logged and posted online. Harold nodded. And no more lifetime appointments, term limits, 2 years max. I added full audit trail for every dollar spent, open books. Deanna glanced at me. "You think people will trust an HOA again after all this?" "They don't have to trust the name," I said. "Just the people running it." That Monday, the neighborhood voted on the new charter. The turnout was the largest on record. People who hadn't attended meetings in years showed up with lawn chairs and thermoses. The vote passed unanimously. Zelda's trial was set for the fall. The court denied her bail after prosecutors revealed she'd attempted to transfer funds to a bank in the Cayman Islands. Her lawyer, a stiff man with a sharp suit and a forced smile, tried to argue diminished capacity. The judge wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Deanna was formally elected president of the new board. Harold became treasurer. I took no position but served as an advisor during the transition. The neighborhood began to repair itself slowly. The fines were reversed. The false citations erased. Sprinklers that hadn't worked in months were fixed. The clubhouse got repainted. And the residents? They started waving again. One evening, as I sat on the porch with my feet up, a kid from 3 houses down tossed a paper plane into the street. It landed near my truck. When I picked it up, I saw a message written in crayon on the wing. "Thanks for fixing the grown-ups." I laughed, folded it again, and launched it back. The day Zelda's trial began, the courthouse lobby buzzed with reporters and residents. A few stood near the entrance holding signs, not protest signs, just printed sheets with phrases like "No more fake fines" and "Let the neighborhood heal." No one shouted. No one argued. It was a quiet kind of solidarity. I didn't attend the full trial. I didn't need to. I'd already testified during pretrial hearings and the evidence had been overwhelming. My only reason for being there that morning was to deliver a final statement to the court, a victim impact summary the judge had requested. I'd written it the night before, staying up until well past midnight trying to find the right tone. Not vengeful, just honest. When I entered the courtroom, Zelda was already seated at the defendant's table. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun, her expression rigid. She didn't look at me. I doubted she'd look at anyone. Her attorney sat stiffly beside her, visibly uncomfortable, probably regretting having taken the case. The judge called a recess after the morning session and waved me over. "Mr. Ellers, we'll call you for your statement at 2:15. Please remain available." I nodded, then stepped into the hallway where Deanna and Harold waited near a vending machine. Harold handed me a bottle of water without saying anything. Deanna's eyes were tired but resolute. "She's trying to claim she had authorization for the contracts," Deanna said. "She didn't," I replied flatly. "We've got 3 different signatures she forged. One of them belonged to a board member who moved to Arizona 5 years ago." Harold adjusted his cane slightly. "The prosecution's calling him in by video. He agreed to testify once they showed him the ledger entries." I leaned against the wall. "You think she'll plead out before sentencing?" Deanna shook her head. "She's not built for humility. She'll go down swinging." The courtroom reconvened right on time. I was called to the front, handed a copy of my statement to read aloud, and given clearance to speak from the podium. I didn't look at Zelda while I read. I focused on the judge. "I keep thinking about what it means to feel safe in your own home," I began. "That's something most people don't question until it's taken away. The night I found someone in my basement, a place where I keep personal, private parts of my life, I didn't know her intentions. I only knew she wasn't supposed to be there." I paused, not for effect, but because the memory still hit like a cold draft. What I've learned over the past few months is that betrayal doesn't always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives with paperwork. Sometimes it wears a name badge and calls itself a neighbor while it siphons your money and steals your peace. There was no noise in the room, not even a cough. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want accountability, not just for me. For every person who was silenced, manipulated, or fined into submission because someone thought power was more important than community." The judge thanked me and excused me from the podium. By the time I sat back down, Zelda's attorney was already whispering into her ear. She didn't respond. She just stared forward, eyes blank. The prosecution followed with 3 more witnesses: a forensic accountant, a city financial investigator, and a former maintenance vendor who testified that he'd been asked to backdate an invoice in exchange for cash. He declined. Then he got a warning letter about grass length violations the following week. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: burglary, fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and tampering with public records. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence said everything. Sentencing was scheduled for the following week. At the hearing, Zelda finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, and for the first time since this all began, she looked her age. Not older, just worn. Like the layers had been peeled back, and all that was left was someone who'd spent too long trying to control something she never really owned. "I never thought it would go this far," she said. "I believed I was preserving order. I didn't realize I'd become the disorder." The judge listened without interrupting. When she finished, he gave his ruling. "For your actions, which included the infiltration of private property, illegal use of community funds, and intentional deception of both government and residential bodies, this court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 3. She didn't cry. She just nodded, then was escorted out by 2 bailiffs. Back home, the neighborhood didn't throw a party. There were no fireworks, but there was something better: a quiet return to normal. That weekend, a few of us gathered at the clubhouse, not for a meeting, but to repaint the interior. Someone brought sandwiches. A couple of kids ran around with sidewalk chalk. For the first time in a long while, the building felt like it belonged to the people again. Deanna stepped beside me, handing me a roller dipped in primer. "You know we're going to need someone to oversee the annual budget review." I raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job, more like a seat at the table." I thought about it for a moment, then dipped the roller and started on the wall. "All right, but I'm not wearing a name tag," she laughed. "Deal?" Later that night, I sat outside on my porch, the air cooler than usual, the sound of crickets blending with the distant hum of a sprinkler. Across the street, someone was setting up a projector for a movie night. A few folding chairs were already arranged on the lawn. I leaned back and watched the stars blink into view. There wouldn't be any more forged fines taped to mailboxes or fake amendments pushed through unannounced. No more secret meetings or stolen funds. The neighborhood had weathered its storm not with torches and pitchforks, but with truth, patience, and a refusal to be intimidated. Zelda's house would go up for auction in the fall. The proceeds, by court order, would go toward restitution. Every household affected by her fraudulent fines was being refunded, with interest. The city would monitor the new HOA for at least 2 years, and the revised charter was now enshrined in both print and digital record. And me. I kept my basement light off unless I needed it. But the locks had been changed. The cameras stayed up, and my peace of mind finally intact. The neighborhood was no longer her kingdom. It belonged to us now, and we weren't giving it up again.